As you can see here, the trajectory must align precisely with the core schematics to initiate the sequence.
The cleaning cart's metallic groan echoed like a fading whisper as Garrett Fennick guided it through the polished passageways of the Meridian Academy of Astral Sciences. He was 42 years old, his sandy hair beginning to show streaks of silver at the temples, his blue eyes holding a depth of cosmic observation exceeding that of seasoned spacefarers. Yet, here he was, maneuvering a mop bucket past young scholars who likely received more in pocket money than he earned in a full year. "Pardon me," he murmured politely, artfully sidestepping a gaggle of Veltrani students. The insectoid beings responded with a series of mandible clicks, a sound that offered no clear indication of respect or disdain. With the Veltrani, such ambiguity was par for the course. Their multifaceted eyes briefly registered his presence before returning to the holographic textbooks displayed on their individual tablets. The Meridian Academy, a vast orbital complex situated at the convergence of three major interstellar trade arteries, had been a bastion of galactic elite education for more than 2 centuries. Its reputation was beyond reproach, its fees astronomically high, and its support personnel, as the Academy's official literature delicately put it, constituted the invisible foundation, enabling scholastic achievement. Garrett had been a part of this invisible framework for 6 years. He turned a corner, heading towards Lecture Hall 17, where Professor Ciara Walmuth was leading her advanced seminar in celestial navigation mathematics. The door stood ajar, as it often did, reflecting the Draenith professor's belief that knowledge should be freely accessible, even if only the truly deserving could partake. Garrett had heard that particular sentiment approximately 300 times and had long since stopped keeping count. Through the open doorway he could discern her figure. Professor Walmuth stood before a holographic projection that dominated half the chamber, filled with glowing mathematical constructs. She possessed a magnificent aura, akin to a powerful thunderstorm, beautiful, formidable, and undeniably confident in her intellectual superiority. Her scales, shimmering with hues of emerald and teal, caught the ambient light, creating shifting patterns reminiscent of the ocean's depths. The delicate, membranous wings folded against her back would occasionally twitch, emphasizing a particularly crucial point, their translucent green surfaces reflecting the luminous equations she expertly manipulated. 2 elegant horns curved gracefully from her forehead, polished to a sheen that spoke of meticulous care. Her long, dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, a stark and striking contrast to her iridescent scales. Her eyes, an icy blue, sharp enough to pierce through reinforced hull plating, were currently fixed on a visibly apprehensive graduate student who had clearly provided an incorrect response. "So, you contend," Professor Walmuth's voice, bearing the distinguished cadence of her Draconith homeworld, resonated, "that navigational deviations can be quantified without considering the influence of gravitational lensing effects?" The student, a synthetic being with polished chrome plating and nervously blinking optical sensors, seemed to physically diminish. The standard formulation? The standard formulation applies to standard scenarios, Professor Walmuth countered, her clawed digit tracing a luminous path through the holographic display. "We are not discussing standard scenarios. We are discussing excellence. Do you grasp the distinction?" Garrett understood. He understood profoundly. He also recognized that the professor's third line of calculation contained a minor, easily overlooked error in its coefficient, an error that would compound exponentially over greater distances, ultimately leading to catastrophic miscalculations. He should have continued walking. He always continued walking. That was the role of invisible infrastructure. But today, something lodged in his throat. Perhaps it was the sight of the synthetic student struggling with a problem founded on an erroneous premise. Perhaps it was the accumulated weight of 6 years spent observing doorways filled with knowledge he had once freely absorbed. Or perhaps it was the message he had received that very morning, a message now residing in his pocket like a leaden burden. "Professor Walmuth," he heard himself utter. 37 heads swiveled in his direction. The professor's wings flared outward slightly, a Draconith display of displeasure, though she quickly reined it in. "The maintenance personnel," she declared, each syllable laced with frost, "are expected to perform their duties without disrupting academic proceedings. I believe even humans can comprehend such a straightforward directive." "Yes, ma'am. My apologies." Garrett tightened his grip on the cart. "Just walk away. Keep moving. It's merely your third line, he continued, the words escaping him as if pulled by an unseen force. The coefficient for the Halverson variable. It should be negative. The ensuing silence was so profound it could have solidified starship fuel. Professor Walmuth turned with agonizing slowness, her blue eyes narrowing to predatory slits. I beg your pardon? Garrett's heart pounded against his ribs, yet the words persisted. The Halverson variable describes rotational compensation within curved spacetime. When applied to navigational variance, the coefficient inverts. Standard texts often overlook this because Halverson's original paper contained a transcription error during the peer review process. However, if you trace back to her laboratory notes from the Riel expedition, the negative coefficient yields results consistent with observed phenomena. For a suspended moment, no one dared to breathe. Then, Professor Walmuth's wings unfurled fully, an unmistakable signal of extreme agitation that caused several students to lean back in their seats. Leave, she commanded, her voice dangerously low. Remove yourself from my lecture hall before I have you summarily dismissed. Garrett inclined his head. Of course, Professor. My apologies for the intrusion. He pushed his cart away, the squeaking wheel now sounding like derisive laughter. Behind him, he heard the professor abruptly order the display to recalculate with the negative coefficient. He heard the sharp intake of collective breath when the equation resolved perfectly, but by then, Garrett Fenwick was already 3 corridors distant, his invisibility restored. News of the incident spread through the Meridian Academy with the speed of a hull breach alarm. By dinner, everyone, from administrative assistants to senior faculty, had encountered some version of the tale. A human janitor had corrected Professor Cythera Walmuth in front of her entire advanced seminar. Reactions predictably varied across species and status lines. The student body found it uproariously amusing. Captured snippets of the encounter, recorded by students who should have been taking notes, proliferated through private networks, accompanied by captions ranging from utterly annihilated to when the mop guy knows more than your professor. The faculty, however, found it deeply embarrassing. Professor Walmuth's reputation was intrinsically linked to their own. If a maintenance worker could identify flaws in her calculations, what did that imply about the institution's academic standards, let alone Professor Walmuth herself? She sat alone in her office, the lighting dimmed to a soft amber, echoing the sunset hues of her homeworld. Academic accolades adorned her walls, certificates from 17 esteemed institutions, commendations from the Galactic Navigation Council, and a personally signed letter of appreciation from Admiral Korath himself for her contributions to the Periphery Mapping Project. She was 39 years old, the youngest full professor of navigation mathematics in the Academy's history. Her publication record boasted 43 papers. She had mentored 92 successful graduates and developed 3 navigational theorems bearing her name. And a janitor had found an error in her work, an error she herself had failed to detect in 15 years of teaching that specific lecture. Her talon-like fingers drummed against her desk. The logical part of her mind, the part that had earned her those accolades, conceded that the human had been unequivocally correct. His reference to Halverson's original laboratory notes suggested an acquaintance with historical documentation that most navigation specialists never bothered to explore. But the proud, Draconith part of her, conditioned from birth to view her species as the galaxy's preeminent intellects, seethed with humiliation. How dare he? How dare a human of all species expose her error? How dare he do so publicly, casually, as if correcting a Draconith professor were no different from pointing out a smudge on a floor? Her office terminal chimed, an incoming message from Dr. Ramek Shandor, head of the Academy Senate. Cythera. The elderly being's image materialized, his multifaceted eyes catching light from multiple angles. I trust you have observed the circulation statistics regarding today's incident. I have, she replied, her voice carefully neutral. It has been addressed. Has it? Shandor's mandibles clicked with skepticism. Our enrollment liaison reports 17 inquiries in the past 3 hours, all questioning whether our faculty standards have indeed declined. The consortium of aligned institutions has requested a formal statement. Professor Walmuth's scales rippled with suppressed emotion. What would you have me do, Doctor? Dismiss my entire seminar? Pretend the correction was inaccurate? I would have you contain the damage. Shandor's tone hardened. The Bellerix equation competition commences in 12 days. We have the most formidable candidate pool in 2 decades. This is hardly the opportune moment for our reputation to suffer. The Bellerix competition, of course, was the sector's most prestigious mathematical challenge, sponsored by the Bellerix Foundation, with a prize worth more than most graduates earned in 5 years. Victory brought immense prestige to the institution, enhanced recruitment prospects, and secured substantial research funding. "I will handle it," Professor Walmuth stated firmly. "See that you do. The Academy's standing cannot withstand another such embarrassment." The connection terminated. Sithara remained in the amber dimness, her thoughts swirling like debris fields through a navigation computer's calculations. A janitor had embarrassed her. Very well. Then a janitor would provide the solution. Garrett remained oblivious to the competition until 2 days later, when a formal notification appeared on his maintenance terminal. All staff were mandated to attend the opening ceremony of the Bellerix equation competition, providing catering and facility maintenance throughout the week-long event. He promptly deleted the notice without reading its specifics. He had far more pressing concerns. The message residing in his pocket, now transferred to his personal communicator, contained news that rendered academic politics laughably trivial. "Mr. Fenwick," the voice emanated from behind him as he restocked cleaning supplies in Storage Bay 14. "A moment of your time." He turned to find Professor Walmuth standing in the doorway, her wings tightly folded against her back, her expression unreadable. Today she wore her formal academic regalia, bronze and leather accented with silver. A sapphire, matching her eyes, was set into the chest plate. "Professor," he inclined his head respectfully, "I apologize again for the interruption the other day. It will not happen again." "Yes, it will." She stepped into the storage bay, her clawed feet clicking softly against the metal flooring. "Because I intend to ensure it does." Garrett placed the container of industrial solvent he was shelving back on the rack. "I'm not sure I comprehend." "The Bellerix equation competition?" Her tail swished once behind her, a subtle indicator of nervous energy, he noted, though her face remained impassive. "You are aware of it?" "Vaguely. It's the most demanding mathematical challenge in this sector. Teams from 47 institutions participate. The individual prize is considerable, and the winning institution receives preferential allocation of research funding for the subsequent year. Congratulations in advance to whichever institution triumphs." Professor Walmuth's eyes narrowed. "The competition is open to all Academy-affiliated individuals, including staff." The implication struck him like a physical blow. Garrett actually let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You cannot be serious." "I am proposing a demonstration," she stated, her voice adopting a formal, almost proclamatory tone. "A public event to showcase that the Academy values talent irrespective of its origin. You will enter the individual competition. You will demonstrate your abilities. And when you inevitably fail, because navigational mathematics at a competitive level requires years of structured training that a maintenance worker could not possibly possess, the Academy's academic standards will be vindicated. And if I do not fail?" The question hung in the air between them. Professor Walmuth's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Indulge me, Mr. Fenwick. This is, after all, mathematics. Numbers do not lie. They are indifferent to circumstances, species, or designation." She gestured around the storage bay. "If you truly understand the concepts you referenced in my lecture, you have nothing to lose by demonstrating it publicly." Garrett studied her for a long moment. He perceived the wounded pride beneath the proposal, the ego seeking validation. He recognized the political mach kai, the attempt to regain control of a narrative that had slipped from her grasp. He also saw an opportunity. "I have conditions," he stated, her wings twitching in surprise. "You are not in a position to negotiate. Then I must decline your generous offer, and you may explain to the Academy Senate why you failed to resolve the situation they are so concerned about." For a fleeting instant, genuine anger crossed her features. Then reluctantly, she nodded. "Name them." "First, I compete as myself, not as a pawn in your political machinations. My name in the registry, my solutions judged by the same criteria as everyone else." "Agreed." "Second, regardless of the outcome, my position here remains secure. No restructuring or efficiency drives that coincidentally eliminate my employment." A prolonged pause. "Agreed." And third, Garrett met her ice blue gaze directly, if I win, and I'm not claiming I will, you will acknowledge it publicly. No qualifications, no asterisks, no explanations about fortunate guesses or simplified problems. Professor Walmuth's scales rippled once more. He was asking her to stake her reputation on a janitor's potential failure. But she couldn't be wrong. She wouldn't be wrong. The galaxy operated on rules, hierarchies, established channels through which intellect manifested. A human who cleaned floors for a living could not possibly contend with graduates who had dedicated years to mastering the discipline. Agreed, she said. Then, pride compelling her to regain some measure of control, she added, and when you inevitably reach the point where your self-taught knowledge proves insufficient, when the problems transcend whatever parlor tricks you have accumulated, I expect you to acknowledge that as well, publicly. Fair enough. Excellent. She turned toward the door, then paused, glancing back over her shoulder. The preliminary rounds commence in 3 days. I suggest you spend them recalling why amateurs should not challenge professionals. She swept out of the storage bay, leaving Garrett alone with his cleaning supplies and the weight of his recent agreement. He retrieved his communicator and re-examined the message. 3 words that had haunted him for 2 days. Treatment urgently required. His daughter, Piper, 17 years old, possessed a brilliance far exceeding her years. Yet she was fading, her brain succumbing to neural degradation that conventional medicine could not halt. An experimental treatment existed on Alta Station, a cutting-edge regenerative therapy that had shown promise in similar cases. The cost, however, was equivalent to 15 years of his current salary. The Bellerix prize would cover it, barely. Garrett Fenwick placed the last container of solvent back on the shelf, checked his schedule, and began to strategize. 3 days later, the Grand Assembly Hall of Meridian Academy blazed with holographic projections as 47 institutional delegations took their seats. Representatives from every major species in the sector mingled in the observation galleries. Draconith aristocrats in ceremonial armor, Veltrani academics with their characteristic clicking speech, ethereal Lumari who seemed to emanate their own light, chrome-plated synthoid administrators, and a scattering of humans occupying the less prestigious positions toward the rear. The Bellerix competition had been a fixture for 83 years. In that time, no human had ever placed higher than 12th. Garrett stood near the maintenance staff entrance, attired in his cleanest uniform, the blue jacket with its tech-enhanced cuffs, and the standard identification badge that marked him as invisible infrastructure. Around him, his colleagues prepared refreshment carts and checked cleaning equipment. "You actually registered?" remarked Marina Cho, a fellow maintenance worker responsible for the botanical gardens. She was 63, had immigrated from Earth's Pacific Combine 40 years prior, and produced the finest contraband coffee in the sector. "Saw your name on the list. Assumed it was a system glitch." "No glitch, Fenwick." She grasped his arm, her weathered face etched with concern. "What are you doing? These people consume mathematics for breakfast. You're going to embarrass yourself in front of the entire station?" "Likely," he conceded. "But I have my reasons." "Reasons?" Marina shook her head. "When this goes south, and it will, remember that I make excellent coffee and even better conversation. You'll need both." The ceremony commenced with traditional fanfare, speeches from Foundation representatives, acknowledgments of sponsors, and introductions of the institutional delegations. When the Meridian Academy team was announced, 8 brilliant young mathematicians rose to accept the crowd's applause. They represented the elite of the elite, top graduates from the sector's most prestigious programs, personally selected and trained by Professor Walmuth herself. Then came the individual registrations. Names scrolled across the main display as competitors positioned themselves in the preliminary testing area. Meridian Academy, Garrett Fenwick, Maintenance Division. The applause died like a flame extinguished in a vacuum. Hundreds of eyes turned towards the maintenance entrance, where Garrett straightened his jacket and walked towards the testing floor. Whispers cascaded through the galleries. A few students openly chuckled. In the faculty section, Professor Walmuth sat rigid, her expression carved from stone. "Maintenance Division," someone exclaimed loudly enough to carry. "Is this a jest?" Garrett took his assigned position at testing station 47. Around him, competitors adjusted their personal displays and prepared their calculation implements. Most utilized sophisticated neural interfaces that directly connected to their cognitive processes. Garrett had a standard issue tablet, the kind the maintenance department used for inventory tracking. The preliminary round tested fundamental competency, 20 problems, graduated difficulty, 60 minutes. Anyone completing at least 15 correctly would advance. The first problem appeared on his display. A basic navigational variance calculation. Precisely the type of problem he had spent 6 years observing Professor Walmuth teach. Precisely the type of problem he had committed to memory from textbooks during his meal breaks. Precisely the type of problem he had solved in his mind while pushing a squeaking cart through endless corridors. He began to work. Professor Walmuth observed the preliminary round from the faculty observation platform, her talons digging into the armrest of her chair. Around her, colleagues engaged in hushed speculation about the maintenance worker's impending humiliation. 10 credits says he doesn't finish 5 problems, muttered Professor Hicks, a synthoid specializing in theoretical physics. 20 says he walks out before the 30-minute mark, added Dr. Vizara, a Lumari whose inherent glow had taken on an amused tint. Sithara remained silent. She was watching Garrett Fenwick's display, visible on her personal screen through administrative access she probably shouldn't have possessed. She watched his solutions materialize. Clean, efficient, correct. Problem after problem, solved with a speed that rivaled the top competitors. By the 20-minute mark, he had completed 12 problems, all accurately solved. By the 30-minute mark, 16, all correct. At 45 minutes, with 5 problems remaining, he paused. The current challenge presented a complex problem with multiple variables, a type of optimization that typically necessitates specialized computational methods, tools that most participants had dedicated years to mastering. Sithara leaned forward, a flicker of anticipation in her eyes. Here it comes, she mused internally. This is the critical juncture where amateur passion confronts seasoned expertise. Garrett remained engrossed in the problem for a considerable period. Then, he began to formulate his response. His approach was fundamentally flawed, utterly unconventional. He eschewed any established algorithmic frameworks. Instead, he conceptualized the optimization as a geometrical construct, manipulating abstract shapes within a multi-dimensional framework, rather than resorting to conventional numerical calculations. It was an approach that logically should not yield success. This methodology was antiquated, largely discarded decades prior in favor of more sophisticated computational techniques. Yet, the answer he ultimately provided was correct. Sithara's iridescent scales shimmered. She felt the collective gaze of her colleagues shifting towards her, one by one observing the seemingly impossible unfold on their displays. 20 problems, 60 minutes. Garrett Fenwick, from the maintenance division, had successfully completed all 20 challenges with 11 minutes to spare. Every single solution was accurate. The public leaderboard refreshed. His name now occupied the 3rd position, trailing only 2 representatives from the esteemed Nixeri Institute, and ranking above every single graduate of Meridian Academy. Well, Professor Hicks remarked, his voice cutting through the profound silence, this certainly promises to make the competition considerably more intriguing. The tournament structure stipulated the elimination of half the participants after each stage, progressing from the preliminary rounds to the quarterfinals. 137 competitors dwindled to 68. From the quarterfinals to the semifinals, 68 contestants were reduced to 34. Finally, from the semifinals to the championship round, 34 individuals were narrowed down to 16. Garrett Fenwick advanced through each of these stages. His problem-solving methods became the subject of widespread discussion among the competitors. Their notoriety stemmed not from their refined elegance, which they often lacked, but from their strikingly unorthodox strategies. He tackled orbital mechanics issues by employing principles derived from ancient navigational techniques. He addressed intricate probability matrices by transforming them into visual representations. He approached each task not as a mathematician adhering to prescribed methodologies, but as an individual who had learned to perceive the fundamental structures underpinning mathematical principles. He's treating mathematics like a language, one frustrated competitor voiced to the media following the quarterfinal round. The rest of us are meticulously following grammatical rules, while he's simply conversing fluently. The media naturally seized upon this narrative. Janitor conquers competition, proclaimed one prominent headline. Mop and equations, read another. Maintenance man upholds mathematical supremacy. Garrett, however, remained indifferent to the press coverage. His free time was spent in the repurposed maintenance closet he had transformed into a study area. There, he meticulously reviewed past problems, prepared for upcoming rounds, and dispatched messages to Piper, hoping they conveyed more confidence than he genuinely felt. "You're actually going to win this, aren't you?" Marina found him engrossed in this endeavor the evening before the final round, surrounded by holographic displays projecting practice problems. "Great galaxies, Fenwick. You're really going to pull it off. I haven't secured victory just yet. You're among the final 16, a janitor in the final 16 of the Bellerix competition." She handed him a cup of her illicitly brewed coffee. "What's truly motivating you? And don't tell me you're simply passionate about mathematics. Nobody dedicates this level of effort for pure enjoyment." He was silent for a considerable pause. Then he projected an image onto his personal display. A young teenage girl, possessing his distinctive blue eyes and her mother's dark hair, her smile undimmed by the visible medical monitoring equipment in the background. "Piper," he stated, his voice laced with emotion. "My daughter. She's on Harvest Colony with her mother. We separated when Piper was 7. Divergent career aspirations, one might say. Her mother sought stability. I desired continued exploration. Now Piper suffers from Callaway syndrome, a neural degenerative condition. The conventional treatments have proven ineffective." Garrett, his gaze fixed on the prize money listed on the competition schedule, continued, "There's an experimental protocol available at Alter Station. It has shown considerable promise. It might save her life." Marina sank onto a nearby storage crate, her expression heavy. "Why on earth didn't you mention this sooner? We could have, I don't know, organized a charitable drive, petitioned the administration for assistance for a maintenance worker." Garrett's laughter held no trace of mirth. "We're rendered invisible, Marina. That's the entire point. Our function is to ensure operational continuity while the truly significant individuals engage in their consequential pursuits. No one orchestrates fundraising endeavors for the unseen infrastructure. Then force them to acknowledge your existence." Marina grasped his arm with renewed intensity, her grip firm. "You've reached the final round, Fenwick. You've already commanded their attention. Now, see it through to the end." He glanced at the competition schedule one last time. Final round. 16 competitors. 1 prize. "Yes," he affirmed. "That is my intention." The concluding stage of the Bellerix competition traditionally convened within the Academy's magnificent amphitheater, a colossal venue designed to accommodate 3,000 spectators. Every seat was occupied. The surplus audience followed the proceedings via holographic transmissions disseminated throughout the station. Across the wider sector, millions more connected through broadcast feeds. Professor Ciara Valmuth occupied a seat within the judges' enclave, her countenance carefully maintained in a neutral expression. The preceding week had been a unique form of personal torment. Each advancement Garrett made cast a pall over her initial dismissal of his capabilities. Every correct solution challenged her assertion that rigorous academic training was indispensable for mathematical excellence. Each news report featuring his maintenance uniform felt like a direct personal indictment. Yet, an unexpected sentiment began to stir beneath her bruised pride. She had meticulously reviewed his competition solutions, delved into his unconventional methodologies, and traced the logical underpinnings of his visual problem-solving techniques. The work, while lacking conventional polish and elegance, possessed a brilliance that subtly redefined her own understanding, making it feel, in some measure, incomplete. Her entire academic and professional life had been structured around established pathways: coursework, degrees, publications, promotions, a meticulously climbed ladder pursued with unwavering focus. Examining Garrett Fenwick's solutions was akin to encountering someone who had discovered the ability to fly while she was still ascending. The format for the final round differed significantly from the preceding stages. Instead of a series of individual timed problems, the 16 finalists were presented with a single, overarching challenge. This equation, carefully selected by the Foundation's distinguished mathematical council, was so profoundly complex that no participant was realistically expected to derive a complete solution. Points would be awarded based on the extent of progress achieved, the elegance of any partial solutions formulated, and any novel insights that advanced comprehension even in the absence of a final answer. Dr. Shandor, in his capacity as head of the Academy Senate, delivered the ceremonial introduction. Subsequently, the equation materialized. It spanned the amphitheater's primary display screen, a sprawling nexus of variables and intricate relationships that compelled even the most seasoned professors in attendance to lean forward with palpable interest. This represented the vanguard of mathematical inquiry, the very caliber of problem that research consortiums dedicate years to unraveling. The competitors were allotted 3 hours. The majority would likely achieve meaningful progress on approximately 20% of the problem's structure. A performance of truly exceptional merit might reach 40%. Garrett simply gazed at the formidable equation before him. Other finalists were already actively engaged, their neural interfaces humming with computational activity as they embarked on their systematic approaches. He remained motionless. 1 hour elapsed. His personal display remained blank while other competitors steadily accumulated partial solutions. Within the judges' area, Professor Valmuth observed with an expression that bordered on concern. "He's paralyzed," a colleague whispered. "Stage fright has finally overwhelmed him." 90 minutes passed, and still no tangible output from Garrett. A low murmur began to ripple through the audience. Commentators on the broadcast feed speculated about the immense psychological pressure, about the inevitable collapse that virtually everyone had anticipated from the outset. Then, precisely at the 100-minute mark, Garrett began to formulate his response. His initial entry was not a calculation, but a question, posed within the marginalia of the notation. "Assume structure is recursive." Several judges subtly frowned. The equation was demonstrably not recursive. Its underlying structure had been exhaustively analyzed and officially certified as non-repeating. His second entry, transform coordinate frame to polar hyperbolic. Further frowns materialized. Such a transformation would likely complicate rather than simplify most conventional analytical pathways. His third entry, now I perceive it. And with that, he commenced the solution process, not from the conventionally expected starting point as every other competitor, but from an unexpected locus within the problem's intricate framework. His display, populated with notation that conspicuously omitted expected transitional steps and fluidly shifted between disparate sections of the equation as if interconnected by unseen conduits, began to construct a solution architecture that no individual present in the amphitheater had ever witnessed or even contemplated. "What precisely is he doing?" Dr. Shandor demanded, his mandibles clicking with increasing rapidity. "This deviates entirely from accepted methodology." Professor Valmuth offered no immediate reply. She was captivated by the visual spectacle of the equation dynamically reconfiguring itself under Garrett's guidance, revealing intricate patterns she had previously overlooked and unexpected interconnections she had never imagined. By the 2-hour mark, he had completed 70% of the problem. At 2 hours and 30 minutes, his progress reached 85%. With merely 12 minutes remaining, Garrett Fenwick, the unassuming maintenance worker, inscribed the final line of a solution that defied all logical expectation. The verification system meticulously processed his submission. The amphitheater fell into a profound silence. Solution verified, complete. All parameters satisfied. The stillness persisted for approximately 3 seconds. Then, the amphitheater erupted. Students' shouts of astonishment echoed. Faculty members remained frozen in an almost catatonic state of disbelief. The broadcast feeds faltered and crashed due to overwhelming data traffic. Across the sector, mathematicians who had dedicated their careers to achieving insights far less significant than this watched as a janitor from Meridian Academy accomplished a feat that would irrevocably alter their entire field. And within the judges section, Professor Cythera Valmuth experienced a profound internal shattering. It was not her pride this time, but the very foundations of the conceptual walls she had erected around her understanding of what true intelligence could manifest as, its origins, and the myriad forms it could assume. She recalled her jest from weeks prior, uttered in a moment of anger and wounded ego. "Solve this equation, and I will marry you." Her intention was to present an insurmountable impossibility, a means to underscore the vast gulf that separated her world from his. He had, against all odds, solved it. The award ceremony was scheduled for the following evening, providing the Foundation ample time to meticulously verify the results and orchestrate an appropriate celebration. In the interim, the station had transformed into a peculiar blend of carnival atmosphere and existential crisis. Everyone clamored for an audience with Garrett Fenwick. Media requests flooded in at a rate that overwhelmed the communication systems. Academics engaged in fervent debates regarding the profound implications of his analytical approach. Students, the very same students who had initially scoffed at his presence, now congregated outside maintenance closets, hoping for even a fleeting glimpse of the individual who had fundamentally redefined their perception of mathematical brilliance. Garrett, for the most part, sidestepped the attention. He had one crucial conversation to conduct before any celebratory festivities could commence. He located Professor Valmuth in her office, standing silhouetted against the panoramic window that offered a breathtaking view of the stars. Her wings, usually held with imposing rigidity in public, now hung loosely at her sides, an unprecedented posture of relaxation. "You requested to see me," he stated from the doorway. "Yes," she replied, not turning. "Please come in." He stepped inside, allowing the door to softly click shut behind him. Her office felt altered, imbued with a different atmosphere. The numerous accolades adorning the walls seemed less like defensive fortifications and more like artifacts from a perspective he was only beginning to comprehend. "I owe you an apology," she finally articulated, her gaze still fixed upon the celestial expanse. "Not solely for my recent conduct, but for my entire demeanor throughout these past weeks. For every assumption I harbored about you, about humans, about the very nature of intelligence when it deviates from the predictable paths I anticipated. Professor," he began, "allow me to finish." She turned then, and he observed that her striking ice-blue eyes were glistening with what appeared to be unshed tears. "I was raised with the ingrained belief that the Draconith represented the galaxy's preeminent intellectual species, that our methodologies, our societal structures, our modes of comprehension were inherently superior. My entire professional trajectory has been built upon that foundational premise. And then you entered my lecture hall, pushing a cleaning cart, and demonstrated to me that my entire worldview had been fundamentally misaligned. I never intended to cause offense." "Of course you didn't," he conceded. "That's precisely the point." She emitted a strange, brittle laugh, tinged with a profound sense of wonder. "You weren't striving to prove anything. You simply identified an anomaly and rectified it, much like one might notice and repair a faulty light fixture. Because to you, knowledge is not a construct of hierarchy, status, or the assertion of superiority. It is simply knowledge." Garrett pondered his response. Ultimately, he posed a simple question. "Why did you genuinely nominate me for the competition?" Professor Valmuth remained silent for a prolonged interval. "Because I was afraid," she confessed. "I feared that if your solution proved to be genuine insight rather than mere serendipity, then my entire understanding of myself and my species would be fundamentally invalidated. I harbored the hope that witnessing your public failure would definitively confirm my correctness, that the universe would continue to operate according to my established framework. And now," her voice wavered slightly, "now I believe I was an arrogant fool who nearly deprived this institution of a profoundly significant learning opportunity." She moved towards her desk and retrieved a data crystal. "Your solution to the final equation. I have dedicated the entire day to its analysis. Do you comprehend the magnitude of what you have achieved? I solved the problem. You didn't merely solve it. You essentially pioneered an entirely new field within navigational mathematics in the process. The recursive assumption you posited, the transformation of the coordinate frame to reveal latent patterns, that technique will fundamentally reshape our approach to deep space calculations for the next century. Graduate students will be dedicating dissertations to your accomplishments today for a duration exceeding either of our lifespans." Garrett stared at her, astonished. "I just saw the pattern. You perceived what no one else could. And," Professor Valmuth gently placed the crystal down, "that, Mr. Fenwick, is the very essence of genius. Not adherence to conventional protocols, not the accumulation of academic credentials, but the ability to see what others cannot, and the courage to illuminate it for them." She moved closer, and he observed a subtle shift in the coloration of her scales, a deeper teal hue, indicating a less guarded, more vulnerable state. In my lecture hall, I made a remark in a moment of anger. I stated that if anyone managed to solve a particular equation, I would marry them. It was a cruel jest, intended to humiliate, but a promise, once made, remains binding. Professor, you are under no obligation. I am aware I am not obligated, she acknowledged, meeting his gaze directly. But I find myself contemplating what it would be like to learn from someone who perceives the universe through a fundamentally different lens than myself. To engage in dialogues with someone who consistently challenges my preconceptions. To share time with an individual who resolutely refused to remain unseen, even when the entirety of the galaxy implicitly demanded his obscurity. Garrett's thoughts turned to Piper, to the advanced treatment that the prize money would now facilitate. He reflected on 6 years of the constant squeak of cleaning carts and the silent, unacknowledged labor of invisible infrastructure. He considered a future he had long since ceased to envision. I must inform you of something, he said. Before you finalize any commitments, I have a daughter. She is unwell. The prize money is designated for her medical care. Professor Valmuth's expression softened perceptibly. The genuine impetus behind all of this. Yes? Then perhaps, she suggested, her lips curving into a genuine smile, the first he had witnessed from her. We could commence with something more modest than marriage. Dinner, perhaps? An exchange between equals? An opportunity to explore where mutual respect and complementary intellects might lead? Garrett perceived that the universe around him had undergone a profound transformation in the preceding week. He had transitioned from being overlooked to being celebrated, from being dismissed to being respected, from being solitary to becoming something more. Something that felt like the genesis of an entirely new equation, populated by variables he was only beginning to comprehend. I know an excellent coffee smuggler, he offered. Marina makes the finest contraband in this sector. Professor Walmuth let out a genuine laugh, warm and imbued with surprise. Then perhaps she could cater our first dinner. I believe she would enjoy that. Garrett felt an unfamiliar sensation blossom in his chest. She would enjoy it immensely. The award ceremony reconvened in the grand amphitheater, but the atmosphere this time was palpably different. When Garrett Fenwick ascended the stage to accept the Bellerix Prize, the ensuing applause was undeniably heartfelt. Dr. Shandor presented the award, his mandibles arranged in what the Veltrani considered a gesture of profound respect. For exceptional mathematical achievement, he announced, and for demonstrating that true intelligence recognizes no boundaries of species, station, or circumstance, we bestow this year's Bellerix Prize upon Garrett Fenwick. The roar of the crowd was deafening. In the front row, Marina Cho surreptitiously wiped tears from her eyes, feigning fatigue. Beside her, a holographic connection displayed Piper watching from Harvest Colony, her pale features illuminated by a smile that rendered 6 years of arduous, unseen labor utterly worthwhile. Garrett reached the podium and surveyed the vast expanse of faces, students, faculty, administrators, and beings of every conceivable species, all gathered to witness an extraordinary event. He located Professor Valmuth amidst the faculty section, her ice-blue eyes now radiating warmth, her wings folded in a posture he was learning to interpret as serene contentment. "Thank you," he stated simply. "I have a multitude of individuals to express my gratitude to, but my primary objective today is to address the concept of visibility." The audience quieted, their curiosity piqued. For 6 years, I navigated these corridors pushing a cleaning cart. I observed students engrossed in their studies, professors delivering their lectures, and administrators managing the academy's operations. I was, in essence, the invisible infrastructure, the unseen hands that maintained the operational status while the significant endeavors unfolded around me. He paused, collecting his thoughts. I would like to claim that I harbored resentment during that period. I want to assert that each day felt like a squandered opportunity, that I meticulously counted down the hours until I could definitively prove my detractors wrong. He shook his head slowly. But that narrative is inaccurate. Those 6 years imparted lessons that my prior education never could. They instilled in me patience. They honed my observational skills. They taught me to examine systems from their foundational elements upwards, rather than exclusively from a top-down perspective. When Professor Valmuth inquired why I perceived the flaw in her equation, the unvarnished truth is that I had spent 6 years cultivating the ability to perceive situations from a distinctly different vantage point. He glanced at the display showing Piper's face. My daughter is ill. This prize will cover the cost of her treatment. That is the ultimate reason I participated in this competition. Not to make a statement about intelligence or potential, but because a father will undertake any action, no matter how humbling, for the well-being of his child, even to embarrass himself before an entire sector. Laughter, warm and understanding, rippled through the assembled audience. However, Garrett's voice became more serious. Here is what I have come to understand. The individual who cleans your floors may possess insights you have never even contemplated. The delivery driver might possess a more profound grasp of logistics than your most seasoned experts. The invisible infrastructure that sustains your world is comprised of individuals. People with thoughts, with aspirations, and with capabilities that you will never uncover unless you actively dedicate the time to perceive them. He held aloft the prize crystal. This award belongs to everyone who contributed to my learning, whether they were consciously aware of their role as educators or not. To the professors whose lectures I discreetly overheard, to the students whose discussions I followed, to my colleagues in the maintenance department who generously covered my shifts when I needed to dedicate time to study, and, of course, to Professor Cythera Valmuth, who demonstrated the courage to grant a janitor the opportunity to compete, irrespective of the underlying complexities of her motivations at the time. Professor Valmuth inclined her head, a gesture of acknowledgement that conveyed far more than any spoken word. So thank you, Garrett concluded. Thank you for acknowledging my existence. I sincerely hope that all of you will endeavor to perceive each other with a greater degree of clarity from this point forward. The ensuing applause reverberated through the amphitheater, and somewhere within the labyrinthine maintenance corridors of Meridian Academy, a solitary, squeaking cleaning cart stood abandoned, awaiting a new operator. Someone who, in their own unique way, might also prove to be extraordinary. 6 months later, Meridian Academy presented a noticeably altered aspect. Subtle modifications were evident, primarily the introduction of new educational programs specifically designed for the staff, offering maintenance personnel the opportunity to audit academic courses, and the establishment of a mentorship initiative pairing faculty members with employees demonstrating an interest in academic advancement. Professor Valmuth stood by the window of her office, observing the steady arrival of cargo vessels at the station's docking bays. She was no longer the youngest full professor in the Academy's history. That distinction had now passed to a former supply clerk who had exhibited a remarkable aptitude for theoretical physics. However, she found herself entirely unperturbed by this shift. The fervor of her past pursuits now seemed to have faded. The Council has officially adopted the Fenwick method as the definitive approach for intricate navigational computations, a voice announced from behind her. It will be integrated into the primary syllabus commencing next semester. She turned to observe Garrett, who stood framed in the doorway, his appearance remarkably unaltered despite his transition from a custodial role to a distinguished visiting scholar specializing in applied mathematics. He maintained his preference for unadorned attire, eschewing the traditional academic robes. Thank you kindly. Even his cerulean eyes retained that subtle, focused intensity that had initially captivated her. The Fenwick method, she mused aloud. You'll have entire chapters and textbooks bearing your name? I'm endeavoring to keep my thoughts on that matter in check. He approached, drawing alongside her by the window. Marina claims it's going to my head. She's even threatened to assign me the task of tending to the botanical gardens as a reminder of my humble beginnings. Sita let out a soft chuckle. How is Piper? The treatment proved successful. His voice resonated with a profound relief that 6 months had failed to diminish. Neural regeneration is complete. She's taken to applying, shall we say, complexities to my existence, much to my ongoing bewilderment. It seems the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Let's hope she possesses a greater aptitude for avoiding conceited academics than her father. A comfortable silence settled between them for a brief interval. Through the expansive window, a passenger liner was embarking on its voyage to the distant colonies, its navigation lights etching delicate patterns against the backdrop of the starfield. You know, Cythera eventually remarked, I never did uphold that specific pledge I made. Garrett inclined his head. Which pledge would that be? The equation, the one I asserted no individual could decipher. Her scales shimmered, transitioning to that tender shade of teal he had come to recognize as a sign of her vulnerability. You accomplished it. I believe I made a rather significant statement regarding marriage. You also suggested you were jesting. I was, at the time. She turned to face him fully, her wings emitting a soft rustle. However, I've given it considerable thought. The prospect of formally uniting our familial legacies, of forging something collectively that harmonizes Draenith heritage with human tenacity. Sithara, he began gently, I am not requesting an immediate decision from you. She interrupted him with a delicate gesture. I am informing you that the opportunity exists whenever you feel prepared, should you ever reach that point. There are no demands, no imposed expectations, and certainly no requirement for any mathematical proofs. Garrett met her gaze, truly seeing her, much as he had learned to scrutinize equations that initially appeared insurmountable. He perceived the self-assurance she had meticulously honed into a tempered humility. He recognized the keen intellect that now acknowledged and appreciated intelligence in others. He saw the woman who had gambled her reputation to extend an opportunity to a janitor, even if her motivations had been layered with complexity. He envisioned a shared future. Perhaps dinner first, he proposed. Marina has been exploring Draenith cuisine. A fair warning, though. She views spice levels as a personal challenge. Sithara offered a smile, that warm, surprised expression that had become his most cherished sight of her. I accept your proposal, Mr. Fenwick. Garrett. Garrett, she repeated, the name rolling from her tongue as if savored. I believe this marks the commencement of a rather magnificent collaboration. That was precisely my sentiment as well. Beyond the window, the cosmos continued its perpetual ballet. Stars blazed, vessels traversed vast distances, and innumerable lives unfolded in intricate tapestries far too complex to anticipate. Yet, in this singular moment, two individuals, once defined by their disparate roles as educator and attendant, as an individual of noble lineage, and one of the unseen framework, found themselves standing on the precipice of something entirely novel. Equations, after all, consistently yielded solutions. One simply needed to possess the willingness to perceive them, and occasionally the most elegant resolutions emerged from the most unanticipated origins.